Good evening. We're happy to be here at the 8th International Conference on Future Energy in Albuquerque, New Mexico, July 2016. And tonight we have a special guest who is a graduate of Stanford University, Master's in Communication, who's done documentary, film, television, radio, writing. She's had regional Emmys awarded to her and also a national Emmy nomination, and Boston Station Peabody Award. She's worked on various films, honored films, and her biography is so lengthy that I'm just highlighting some of the amazing accomplishments that she's made. Lifetime Achievement Award in the Conscious Life Expo. She's been on the History Channel's Ancient Aliens as well as I have, and she's been on lots more times than I have, that's for sure. But she's an authority, and this is exciting to have her here today to tell you firsthand her research, which is ongoing and unstoppable. And I'm surprised at all the awards that she's received, very judiciously, of course. Encyclopedia Britannica Award for Journalistic Excellence. She also has the 3-hour radio news reports that are on, not only coast to coast, but also the, is there a station that you would recommend? 500 stations throughout North America, syndicated radio program. And she's also books, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 1 and 2. I highly recommend those if you want to see her hands-on experience, even with complex crop formation phenomenon. And she's participated as a journalistic witness even at the citizens' hearing in 2013, which I was there as well. And she was honored for the first Lucius Farish Foundation Award for Excellence in Research. She's traveled throughout the world pursuing her research, and featured speaker on a lot of different conferences, and also a field investigator for the History Channel, which is also an honor in itself because they rely upon people like her for the stories that they actually broadcast, as well as the Discovery Channel. And her television productions have included the World of Chemistry for the PBS channel, Earth Mysteries, Ancient Alien Life Forms, and UFO reports, sightings, as well as work with the US UNICEF and international programming for EarthBeat. So speaking on the topic of a laminated metal specimen with potential for electrogravitics, please welcome Linda Moulton Howe.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very, very much. Thank you all very much for being here. I want to thank Tom Balone, president of the Integrity Research Institute in Beltsville, Maryland, for inviting me to share my research as an investigative reporter into the mystery of layered bismuth and magnesium with a little zinc in micron layers that to date, since Coast to Coast's Art Bell sent me a piece of the layered metal in 1996 to investigate, no one, at least no one that I am aware of, has been able to understand the function or to replicate the strange layered metal that allegedly was retrieved from the bottom of a triangular wedge-shaped craft of unknown origin. The site was described as west of the Sierra Blanca. Here's the Sierra Blanca Mountains. Here's Roswell. Here's Corona, Socorro. Here are the Sierra Blanca Mountains. Here are the San Mateo Mountains. Specifically, the first contact said that his grandfather was in a security team that was operating around this wedge-shaped vehicle, Retrieval, and I think, based on probably a dozen other whistleblowers, it was up near the Trinity site. Here's Trinity, and here's Oscura. The mountains actually run this way, but these words are so you can understand. Trinity site is the little red dot, and here the Oscura. There's North Oscura Peak and Oscura Peak. They're not too far apart, but sometimes people quibble about whether the actual crash was at the bottom of Oscura Peak or North Oscura Peak. Along with the wedge-shaped craft, there were 2 dead bodies and 1 live being, and this is just to reinforce. Here is the North Oscura Peak and Oscura Peak here, and the Trinity site. Now, before I go into those details, I would like to share a little background about me. I graduated in 1968 from Stanford University with a master's degree in communications, where I produced a documentary film for the Stanford Medical Center that they used for 19 years. My master's thesis documentary was about the first use of computers to analyze particle bombardments at the Stanford Linear Accelerator in Palo Alto, California. Then I worked as a TV producer, writer, director, editor, and reporter of documentaries and live studio productions for KNBC in Los Angeles, WCVB in Boston, where I was honored as a science and medical producer in a Station Peabody Award. And by 1978, I was hired as director of special projects at the CBS station in Denver, Colorado, then KMGH-TV. And why I'm stressing this is, it seems schizophrenic to the general audience that anything having to do with an alien presence, advanced technologies from another solar system or even another galaxy is preposterous. And yet I'm standing in front of you here today after 37 years of trying to get to the bottom first of animal mutilations. And where that took me with whistleblowers who were so frustrated by the fact that they've either had to sign non-disclosure agreements and lie, or not sign non-disclosure agreements and then really, really hurt. And it's in the context of all of us in this very transitory, revolutionary time, where the United States of America is either going to honor the Constitution and a government of, by, or for the people, and that people like me, who have been nothing but journalists trying to understand facts, we have been hurt. We continue to be. And we continue to be restrained. And I think that's why I am so grateful that I'm here, and I know that it is a scientific and an engineering context. And so what I'm trying to communicate with a few words is that my beat has always been science, environment, and medicine until 1979, when I produced the 90-minute special A Strange Harvest about the worldwide bloodless, trackless phenomenon of large and small animal mutilations. It was sheriffs and deputies who told me then, in 1979, quote, to my face, the perpetrators of animal mutilations are creatures from outer space, close quote. But most law enforcement would not stand up in front of my TV camera and say that on the record for fear of ridicule. When my documentary of Strange Harvest was first broadcast on May 25, 1980, it received the largest Arbitron and Nielsen audience rating in the history of KMGH-TV, and it's never been broken. That meant animal mutilations were of great interest to a lot of people in Colorado and the surrounding states. So I knew I was just scratching the surface of a large, disturbing iceberg kept hidden from the public and the media by a strict U.S. government policy of denial that had this mantra, quote, I heard it 100 times, there's nothing to animal mutilations except disease, natural predators, and satanic cults, close quote. None of that was true. I knew it. Law enforcement knew it. Even the head of animal mutilation investigations at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Calgary, Canada, Lynn Lauber, called to tell me he knew he was dealing with ETs. But in order to keep the public and the media off their backs, the RCMP kept floating the phony story that a satanic cult called O was responsible. I went on from KMGH-TV to sign a contract with Home Box Office on March 21st, 1983, to produce an hour nonfiction special entitled UFOs, the ET Factor. That's when I hit a hard, deceptive wall of government counterintelligence that wanted to keep me from producing that HBO documentary. I wrote all about that experience in my first book, released in 1989, and in the newly updated second edition in December 2015 of An Alien Harvest, Further Evidence Linking Animal Mutilations and Human Abductions to Alien Life Forms. An Alien Harvest received the 2015 Southwest Book Association's Best Nonfiction Award. It means a lot because the material is so difficult. I've also produced 3 more books, the 2-volume Glimpses of Other Realities, and a book about my research of the crop formation phenomenon entitled Mysterious Lights in Crop Circles. Last year, I also produced an hour Earth Files DVD entitled 10,000 BC, Göbekli Tepe and Ancient Stone Circles, Is It ET Terraforming? In addition to my work as a writer, TV producer, and documentary filmmaker, I began in 1992 to produce radio reports about science, environment, and unexplained phenomena on the nationally syndicated radio broadcast Dreamland, hosted by Art Bell, and a second internationally acclaimed program with Art called Coast to Coast AM. The Dreamland title is slang used at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, to describe the top secret Area 51, where highly classified technology and craft are stored and tested. No one argues with that. But for a long time, some have said there are extraterrestrial craft there hidden behind and below the Papoose mountain range that rises along Area 51. Several of my radio interviews have concerned research about alleged extraterrestrial vehicles that had crashed near several places beyond Roswell to Capitan Mountain, Las Cruces, Socorro, Magdalena, and Farmington, New Mexico. Crash retrieval artifacts and entities were taken to Los Alamos Laboratory for top secret protection in the 1947 to 1948 time period. Some of those radio broadcasts that I did from England and Italy were in the summer and fall of 1995. That's when scenes of a 6-fingered and 6-toed humanoid, dissection, and craft debris were broadcast in the UK and United States amid intense controversy about whether or not the film was actually historic. I was in London. I was in the offices of Santilli and Orbital Inc. I saw not only what was broadcast to the UK and American audiences, but I saw the private interview, the entire interview that he filmed with the original photographer at the Army site inside of a tent of some of what we're going to talk about today. And so from my point of view, even though you will have people want to go into slugfests over this, it's real. The Santilli film is real. Counterintelligence went in overtime to convince the world that it was a hoax. It's not. In fact, I've had several whistleblowers tell me the film of this disc and the artifacts with it and the bodies and the 6-fingered humanoids crashed specifically on May 31st, 1947, southeast of Aragon, New Mexico, about 5 to 10 miles north of Elk Mountain, at the western end of the plains. Elk Mountain is here. Here's Aragon. Here's Roswell. Roswell is about 274.5 miles east. Aragon here. Reserve is another one of the places that over the last, since the 40s, for those of us who have done actual discussions with people who were alive and heard the local scuttlebutt, the town of Reserve, it's always been in people's discussions, and nobody could quite figure it out. And now all the pieces are beginning to come together. Reserve and Aragon and Elk Mountain. All of them came in separate discussions, but on a map, they're very close together. By April 1996, Art Bell and I received a series of letters, each postmarked from South Carolina and signed "Only a Friend." The first letter was dated April 10, 1996, and included several pieces of square-cut gray metal pieces allegedly cut from one of the many UFO crash vehicles in New Mexico, but without giving a specific date and site. Here's this letter. Dear Mr. Bell, I have followed your broadcasts over the last year or so and have been considering whether or not to share with you and your listeners some information related to the Roswell UFO crash. Now, that everybody interprets as between July 2nd and July 6th, 1947. But we now know, there's no question, there were other crashes in the months before July 1947. The first official crash that FDR and General George Marshall and Truman, who was head of the Senate committee, Democratic Senate committee having to do with the DOD budget, Cordell Hull, who was the Secretary of State, they all knew by April of 1941 that 3 clone beings, they were identical, and a craft that was also described as wedge-shaped came down in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. That's 6 full years before the week that we have all heard about. And for those of you who are familiar with my work, you know that at Earth Files and at Coast and at Dreamland and Phenomenon Radio and a whole lot of others, I have been reporting about all of this new breaking news with many, many facts now about the 1941 Cape Girardeau. And why I'm stressing this. The United States government was not broadsided by what happened in Roswell. And they knew that there was or were many craft that they already in the 1941 documents between FDR and George Marshall and Vannevar Bush and all of them, they were referring to them as plan forms, as celestial, as interplanetary plan forms. All of those are words in legitimate documents that are now Bob Wood and Ryan Wood and Stanton Friedman. They all are saying those documents, the MJ-12 documents from the 1947 period and 1952 are real. And this is important for you all, even if you haven't been through the slugging paths that I and some have been reading all these documents and talking with so many people. I'm telling you, the United States of America government was aware of an alien presence before we got into World War II, all the way during World War II, and the policies of denial that have been set in stone since Winston Churchill and Eisenhower agreed have been there. Roswell comes into play in a very interesting way that has to do with our trying to shoot down the craft and they're retaliating. So I'm giving you a little background that there's a reason why this letter should be listened to, because there were so many crashes. My grandfather was a member of a retrieval team sent to the crash site just after the incident was reported, and I think it is near Oscura Peak. He died in 1974, but not before he had sat down with some of us and talked about the incident. I am currently serving in the military and hold a security clearance and do not wish to go public and risk losing my career and commission. Even though I'm not going to go into it, about 2 months after I had been on the radio reporting about all of this, I got a phone call where I was living in Philadelphia, and the voice said, I am the one who has sent you the bismuth, magnesium, and the aluminum. I am in the Army. I'm on my way to Iraq. I do not know if I will survive, and I wanted you to know that what I sent to you, well, to Art Bell, and then he had me research, what I said is real. It was in my grandfather's box that we got after his death. It has a diary. That's where my information has been coming from, and I just want you to know, because I may never ever come back, that what I've sent really was from my grandfather. Nonetheless, I would like to briefly tell you what my own grandfather told me about Roswell. In fact, I enclose for your safekeeping samples that were in the possession of my grandfather until he died, and which I have had since his own estate was settled. As I understand it, they came from the UFO debris and were among a large batch subsequently sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio from New Mexico. It wasn't called Wright-Patterson in the 1947 period. It was still becoming out of Wright Field into what we know as Wright-Patterson today. And a lot of people just call it Wright-Patterson historically. My grandfather was able to appropriate them. I do not know how this occurred because we will hear other discussions. He is surrounding a security team. This thing is glowing, and at some point the light, after 3 hours, dims, and allegedly he goes and pulls pieces. That's the appropriation. I don't know how that's possible, but that's the description. And stated that the metallic samples are, quote, pure extract aluminum, close quote. You will note that they appear old and tempered, and they have been placed in tissue paper and in baggies for posterity. I've had them since 1974, and after considerable thought and reflection, I give them to you. Feel free to share them with any of your friends in the UFO research community. I have listened to many people over the years discuss Roswell and the crash events as reported by many who were either there or who heard about it from eyewitnesses. The recent Roswell movie, and he is referring to the 1995 Ray Santilli film of the six-fingered and six-toed beings. That recent Roswell movie was similar to my grandfather's own account, but a critical element was left out, and it is that which I would like to share. As my granddad stated, the team arrived at the crash site just after the Army Air Force reported the ground zero location. They found 2 dead occupants hurled free of the disc. A lone surviving occupant was found within the disc, and it was apparent its left leg was broken. That word disc, this is another thing that those of us who have investigated for a long time. The shape is a triangle or a wedge. But in 1947, the headlines in newspapers were flying saucer from Kenneth Arnold and disc. And so what you find is in social generations, even if it is a cylinder, a triangle, a sphere, something that looks like a dumbbell, all these different shapes, or a disc, or something that's a triangle, they will call it disc. And that is what's happening here, because all of the descriptions and everything that we know about what actually was retrieved from 3 sites in between July 2nd and 6th of 1947 were all wedge-shaped. None of them were round. A lone surviving occupant was found within the disc, and it was apparent that its left leg was broken. There was a minimal radiation contamination, and it was quickly dispersed with a water solvent wash, and soon the occupant was dispatched for medical assistance and isolation. The bodies were sent to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for dispersal. The debris was also loaded onto 3 trucks, which finished the onload just before the sunset. Granddad was part of the team that went with the surviving occupant. The occupant communicated via telepathic means. It spoke perfect English and communicated the following. The disc was a probe ship dispatched from a launch ship that was stationed at the dimensional gateway to the Terran, referring to Earth, the Terran solar system. I know, this sounds like Star Trek. You can imagine what Art Bell and I thought back in 1996 when we got this. But today, it seems mild compared to William Mills Tompkins talking about Draco and other galaxies, and that there's Lynn Buchanan, the remote viewer, says we already have intergalactic trade, and the government is sitting on that. So in the context of 2016, this seems more reasonable. The occupants were part of a race of explorers from the solar system 32 light years from Terra. They had been conducting operations on Terra for over 100 years. Another group were exploring Mars and Io. And Io is one of the moons of Mars. Now today, in July 2016, according to the Atlas of the Universe website, only 5 stars are listed at around the 32 light years distance from Earth, and they are 61 Ursae Majoris, and it is a orange-yellow G8 main sequence star in the constellation Ursa Major. It is a bit smaller and fainter than our sun, and so far they don't know that it has stellar subcompanions. But in the context of what has been reported in nonfiction, or in fiction, it is very interesting that this star, 61 Ursa Majoris, has shown up, who knows what government input there has been, in the 1966 film The Warriors, and the book The Shape of Space, 1969, Star Trek did an entire segment on this particular planet, and a 1986 project called 2300 AD. And as you go through these, you will find that each one of them has shown up in fiction since the 1960s. Why? And Alpha Mensae on that list is the brightest star in the constellation Mensa. And this star has a classification of a G7, indicating that it is a G-type main sequence star. It's generating energy by fusing hydrogen into helium at its core, very similar to our sun. And it's located, not exactly at 32, as this man said, but located about 33 light years from the sun, and that an infrared excess has been detected around the star, most likely indicating the presence of a circumstellar disk at a radius of over 147 astronomical units. The temperature of the dust is below 22 Kelvin, and so they think it's either a solar system or a solar system developing. And you go through each of these stars, and there are great interests in all 5 in terms of they are sort of in the sequence of our solar system. So not one of them is identified by this man, and I think it's interesting that there's only 5 currently that would be at approximately a 32 light year distance, in which there has been a tremendous amount of interest since the 1960s by somebody putting it out in fiction. Now, continuing with the South Carolina source's first letter with the metal pieces, he says, each probe ship carried a crew of 3. A launch ship had a crew of 100. That's sort of what Tompkins, the naval flight engineer, who's just had his 93rd birthday. Robert Wood has done a book with him. I did 2 half hours on Coast to Coast, long reports at Earth Files, Dreamland, some other radio shows like Midnight in the Desert with Jimmy Church, all about William Mills Tompkins, now for the first time in his long life and career, talking about having knowledge of 3 types of extraterrestrials, conflicts between blondes, reptilians and grays, that the planet Earth is involved with trade routes, even if we don't understand it. He has this huge, gigantic picture of Earth that is beyond anything we have been exposed before. And he said that he checked with a naval admiral before he put this book out with Bob Wood, came out in December. And the admiral said, don't leave anything out. The American people should know this. And here's another one, like Brian in Antarctica. William Mills Tompkins, who served in the Navy, was exposed to all kinds of extraterrestrial issues on the moon, on Mars, throughout the solar system, throughout the Milky Way galaxy in his work. He said that he never was asked once to sign a non-disclosure agreement, but he insists that he was shown lunar, Mars, and other photographs on where there were non-humans active. The photos were of active ETs in those places. So he's not guilty in the United States of America of violating anything any more than Brian in Antarctica. Please keep that in mind. And all of them, none of these people have felt like they could tell anybody until the last year. Think about that. The disk that crashed had collided with a meteor in orbit of Terra and was attempting to compensate its flight vector, but because of the collision, the inner atmospheric propulsion system malfunctioned, and the occupants had sent out a distress signal to their companions on Mars. The launch ship commander made the decision to authorize an attempted soft landing on the New Mexican desert. At the same time, the inter-atmospheric propulsion system had a massive electrical burnout, and the disk was soon virtually helpless. There was another option available to the occupants, but it involved activating the dimensional power plant for deep space travel. Another thing that William Mills Tompkins talks about in great detail. However, it opens an energy vortex around the disk for 1,500 miles in all directions. Activating the dimensional power plant would have resulted in the annihilation of the states of New Mexico, Arizona, California, and portions of Mexico. Possibly even further states would have been affected. Thus, the occupants chose to ride the ship down and hope for the best. They literally sacrificed their lives rather than destroy the population within their proximity. Also, as we know today, the issue of clones, hybrids, and prime intelligence is huge, and I personally am convinced, several other investigators are privately, that most of the so-called pilots of craft, it doesn't matter which country, which hemisphere, I believe are cloned specifically like we would make vacuum cleaners to vacuum a rug. These beings are cloned and programmed a sophisticated biological computer to mutilate animals, abduct people, fly around in disks that are made to crash on purpose in order to get technology into the hands of Homo sapien for reasons that are still not quite clear. The dimensional power plant was self-destructed, and the inter-atmospheric propulsion system also deactivated to prevent the technology from falling into the hands of the Terrans. This was done in accordance with their standing orders in regards to any compromise with contact experiences. Granddad spent a total of 26 weeks in the team that examined and debriefed the lone survivor of the Roswell crash. Granddad's affiliation with the project ended when the occupant was to be transported to a long-term facility. The alien was placed on board a U.S. Air Force, which would have been at the time still in that transition from the U.S. Army airfield to U.S. Air Force in July of '47. A U.S. Air Force transport aircraft that was to be sent to Washington, D.C. The aircraft and all aboard disappeared under mysterious and disturbing circumstances en route to Washington, D.C. It may interest you that 3 fighter aircraft dispatched to investigate a distress call from the transport experienced many electrical malfunctioning system failures as they entered the airspace of the transport's last reported location. No crash or debris of the transport was ever found, and the team was disbanded. I realize I have likely shocked you with this bizarre and incredible account, and seeking to remain unknown likely doesn't do anything for my credibility, and the metal samples only will likely add to the controversy. But I know that you will take this with a grain of salt, and I don't blame you, Mr. Bell. I just hope that you can understand my reasons and my own desire to maintain my career and commission. I am passing through South Carolina with an operational readiness mobility exercise and will mail this just prior to this exercise, possibly from the Charleston area. I will listen to your broadcast to receive any acknowledging or confirmation that you have received this package. This letter and the contents of this package are given to you with the hope that it helps contribute to discussion on the subject of UFO phenomena. I agree with Neil Armstrong, a good friend of mine who dared to say at the White House, no less, that there are things out there which boggle the mind and are far beyond our ability to comprehend. Sign me, a friend. The metal pieces sent by the South Carolina writer were at least hard physical facts I could test. I contacted a scientist in a major Midwestern university who has helped me now for 20 years and still asks me not to reveal him. He used a scanning electron microscope to examine structure and energy dispersive spectroscopy, known as EDS, to analyze element composition. He confirmed that these first metal pieces were greater than 99% aluminum of normal density. After I reported those findings on the radio, we received a second letter dated April 22, 1996. Further information regarding the Roswell crash and my own grandfather's affiliation would likely be potentially beneficial in your efforts at correlation and verification. In this regard, I can only say, based on past conversations on the subject with Granddad, that the Retrieval team consisted of 3 segments: the on-site team, the in-house team, and the security team. The credentials of the team members weren't only military related. There were individuals with backgrounds from the University of Colorado, Office of Naval Research, Army Air Force, U.S. Army, UCLA, and the Atomic Energy Commission, the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, the Office of Scientific Research and Development, that was what Vannevar Bush headed, and additionally there were consultants from England, France, and Russia involved. Granddad stated their own analysis of the samples indicated it as pure extract aluminum as a conductor for the electromagnetic fields created in the propulsion systems. However, critically needed data was eliminated by the self-destruct mechanisms on the disk vehicle itself. Furthermore, the occupant survivor of the crash refused to disclose technical information despite a series of interrogative attempts to extract technological data. No means could be found to secure that information. I probably have had eye-to-eye, face-to-face discussions with 10 different people who have worked in our government, who have had face-to-face with non-humans in the EBIN category, in which they have a translator. The government started looking for translators in the end of the 40s and the 50s, almost aggressively. They knew that there are humans who can get the extraterrestrial telepathic communication very clearly, and they knew that a vast majority of humans could not. So the search for translators was to find people that they could take into classified programs, and that would be their job. And that was and is one of the keys to the fact that the non-humans have clearly had an agenda, a chess game agenda. And so the more that I've begun to understand that so many of these crashes could have been Trojan horses. You want to plant something to direct the United States or France or Russia or whoever it is to go, you go this direction for the next 25 years while we do this on Earth. A lot of that has happened. One man told me, after he retired from the Defense Intelligence Agency, he said, Linda, we have finally caught on to how many red herring paths we've been sent down by technology we retrieve from crashes that had to have been done on purpose. That's why the cloned beings aren't going to communicate to humans if the information is a threat to their bigger goal. There were always 2 security team members present at every face-to-face meeting with the survivor. The survivor had the ability to deduce thoughts and questions prior to them being asked. It's all part and parcel of the same thing. One man said he was assigned in 1978 by a military superior. It was in Arizona. They knew it was an extraterrestrial act. It was energy that destroyed a dam. Water flowed and flooded a village. Our government had no idea why. This man's job was inside of a MJ-12 moon dust unit. And they went there, and the goal was which non-humans did this and why, and that they couldn't get any communication unless they went to the Ebens, and the Ebens ended up sending there was a landing and a literal face-to-face. If you all are uncomfortable with this discussion, just know there are a lot of people without doubt who have had face-to-face in work, in military assignments with these Ebens. And the man experienced a telepathic download, and he said, Linda, everybody would like to go to Starbucks and sit down with these ETs and learn about the universe, and I'm telling you, it ain't gonna happen, because this is what. He said, and he said, I'm on assignment. They're telling me I am going to get a slowed down download, that the gray is going to try to slow down its telepathic operation. And he said, when the eyes connect, you no longer are in control of anything. And he said it was like having 7 movies coming through his head with 3-dimensional, what looked like hieroglyphs. He stressed that. He said, you think of Egypt hieroglyphs. He said, I swear to God, or Etruscan. He said there were these symbols, and they were 3-dimensional, and they are going over these movies. And he said the movies have heat, cold, pressure, all of this in them, and that when it was over, he fainted, and he said it is overwhelming, this inability to take the telepathic download, and that this is a very crucial part of all of this, and that deducing thoughts, that why he thought that he had 7 films is that his mind was trying to ask questions, but that everything that his human mind was doing was being answered by all of this telepathic download, even though the being was trying to slow it all down. The disk itself was literally dissected, and it was discovered that the propulsion system had actually fused together the many interior components. There were control-type devices forged in the shape of the alien hand, which were assumed as controls and activation surfaces. What is today fiber optic technology was part and parcel of the alien technology within the control panels, albeit fused and melted when the self-destruct mechanism was activated. There were Westinghouse-affiliated persons on the team, and Granddad always thought some of them had gone back with the ET knowledge and incorporated it into the future research with the phone systems. Of course, the military was concerned as to the ability of the aliens to enter our atmosphere at will, undetected, because they can be invisible to radar if they choose. and thus they recommended to the president that a space program be set into motion and that a system of satellites be placed into orbit by 1957, and this satellite system be patched into the then DO line early warning system, which became later NORAD. Granddad stated that it was his opinion that NORAD was formed not only to track possible ICBMs from hostile human nations, but as an established detection system for UFO craft. That is why the armed forces, or that is why the NASA Space Agency has been incorporated by and large with our armed forces, and there are so many classified missions. This is my opinion, but Granddad prophesied such occurring as far back as 1971. I'm scheduled to travel back to Charleston Air Force Base and then Pope Air Force Base. I'll mail this from somewhere in South Carolina. I'll not likely communicate again. My wife is concerned, as I am, that the intelligence agencies will put two and two together, so it is inadvisable to further communicate this information. I hope you understand my position. I could likely face a court-martial or sedition charges for stating some of this information and opinions. You would be surprised at the extent of internal policies on this subject and the consequences for current commissioned officers talking about UFO phenomena. I was surprised by astronaut Edgar Mitchell's statements of recent data, and I imagine there are many involved with Roswell who are a bit upset at events underway. However, he is a man of outstanding character and integrity and knows whereof he speaks, as do quite a few other astronauts. I wish you all the best and will be listening. I commend your courage and integrity. I hope your listeners understand that the subject of Roswell has great potential at extrapolating the truth about UFOs and what has come to be known as a cosmic Watergate, Stanton Friedman's phrase, and it is only the tip of an iceberg. Granddad said that when the truth does come out, humanity will be changed beyond comprehension. He also said many of the in-house team lobbied to release the information to the public. Not all of them were paranoid, entrusting the public with the truth. Sign me still a friend. Back engineering extraterrestrial technology for American military and commercial development was well known to retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso, former chief of the Army's Foreign Technology Division in the early 1960s. In the day after Roswell, his 1997 groundbreaking and best-selling book, Colonel Corso described his assignment in 1961 to 63 to get extraterrestrial technology out of the Pentagon storage into the hands of defense contractors. His boss was General Arthur Trudeau, then head of Army Research and Development appointed by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The colonel's list of back-engineered extraterrestrial technologies included night vision image intensifiers, fiber optics, supertenacity fibers, lasers, molecular aligned metallic alloys, which is probably applicable to the bismuth magnesium, integrated circuits, microminiaturization of logic boards, particle beams, electromagnetic propulsion systems, and hand-imprinted control panels. This is what Colonel Corso wrote about the panels retrieved from a crescent-shaped extraterrestrial vehicle that crashed in New Mexico, and which sounds similar to the South Carolina writer's description. Quote, "The series of raised deck panels were indentations for the creature's hand. The indentations on these panels, as the Roswell field reports described them, looked like the handprints pressed into the concrete at Old Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. Were the directional commands a series of electronic instructions transmitted directly from the creature's brains along their bodies and through the panels into the ship itself, as if the ship were only an extension of the creature's body." Colonel Corso said, that extraterrestrial bodies first went to Wright Field in Cincinnati, Ohio, but after the U.S. Air Force became its own separate branch of the service, quote, the remaining bodies stored at Wright, along with the spacecraft, were sent to Norton Air Force Base in California. J. Allen Hynek and I and a friend had dinner on the first weekend of August of 1985. None of us knew that Allen would be dead 4 months later or so in April from the aggressive brain tumor from his prostate cancer, but that night he was agonizing with me and a friend about the fact that that summer he had been contacted to go to Norton Air Force Base, same Norton Air Force Base, to see different craft and different alien bodies that he said were underground at Norton in something like a museum. And he got to Norton, and then he was denied access. And J. Allen Hynek, at the end of his life, sitting there with him at that dinner that night, I'll never forget how he grabbed a hold of my right arm at the dinner table, strongly, with tears in his eyes. Linda, do you think that we'll ever be vindicated in our lives? Experiments were carried out at Norton and ultimately at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada at the famous Groom Lake site, Area 51, known as Dreamland, where the stealth technology was developed, close quote. The colonel said that the U.S. Air Force and CIA maintained a kind of alien technology museum at Norton Air Force Base, exactly what J. Allen Hynek had been told that he would see. Norton Air Force Base was closed down in the 1990s, and one wonders where the Alien Technology Museum went, or if it's still there. Is it underground or disguised in some way, like a library? Colonel Corso said the motives of the extraterrestrials were puzzling and of great concern to government insiders when he worked in the White House National Security Staff under President Dwight Eisenhower and later in the Pentagon under General Arthur Trudeau. The priority of the U.S. government was to get as much advanced extraterrestrial technology as possible, keep it out of the hands of Cold War enemies, which specifically were the Soviets or today's Russians, while pushing through weapons development that might reduce the advantage of the advanced and potentially threatening non-human intelligence. And Colonel Corso wrote on pages 180 to 182 in his book. In the Pentagon from 1961 to 1963, I reviewed field reports from local and state policy agencies about the discoveries of dead cattle whose carcasses looked as though they had been systematically mutilated, and reports from people who claimed to have been abducted by aliens and experimented upon. One of the common threads in these stories were reports by the self-described abductees of being subjected to some sort of probing or even a form of surgery with controlled, intense pencil-thin beams of light, close quote, which Colonel Corso associated with laser instruments retrieved from downed spacecraft. Quote, local police reported that when veterinarians were called to the scene to examine the dead cattle left in fields, they often found evidence not just that the animal's blood had been drained, but that entire organs were removed with such surgical skill that it couldn't have been the work of predators or vandals removing the organs for some depraved ritual. I also remembered that both civilian and military intelligence personnel attached to the staffs of individuals who worked for the Hillenkoetter and Twining working groups on UFOs in the 1950s were actively engaging in research into the kinds of surgical methods that would produce crime scene evidence like this. Although the first public reports of cattle mutilation surfaced around 1967 in Colorado, at the White House we were reading about the mutilation stories that had been kept out of the press as far back as the middle 1950s, especially in the area around Colorado. Our intelligence organizations, and especially the working group, believed that the cattle mutilations that could not be obviously explained away as pranks, predators, or ritual slaughter were the results of interventions by extraterrestrials who were harvesting specific organs for experimentation. That means genetic harvesting to create clones, hybrids, and various kinds of manipulations on this planet and through the solar system. We had irrefutable evidence that EBAs, extraterrestrial biological entities, were landing on farms, harvesting vital organs from livestock, and then just leaving the carcasses on the ground because they knew we could not do anything about it, close quote. The reference to Helen Keter, and just to, so you'll know the level at which our government was working, Helen Keter was a U.S. Navy admiral, and he was the first director of the Central Intelligence Agency and a member of Truman's MJ-12 Special Studies Group. He was appointed specifically by Harry Truman, and Nathan Twining was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from 1957 to 1960, and he was a member of MJ-12. What is that? A cell phone? Please. I guess it's sober stuff. Bring in some levity. The colonel agreed the government had extraterrestrial artifacts from more than one spacecraft. He said that during the Norton Air Force Base testing, it was discovered that, quote, the entire vehicle functioned just like a giant capacitor. The craft itself stored the energy necessary to propagate the magnetic wave that elevated it, as if gravity were being folded around the outside of the wave that enveloped the craft. Somehow the pilots became part of the electrical circuitry of the vehicle, vectoring it in a way similar to the way you order a voluntary muscle to move, close quote. The colonel told me how amazed military and science investigators were about the spacecraft functioning as an extension of the being's neurological systems, including their molecularly aligned and strengthened flight suits and hand-imprinted control panels. The six-fingered hand-imprinted panels were filmed by a former U.S. Air Force cameraman who said those panels were retrieved from a vehicle that crashed on May 31st, 1947. Another May 31st date has also been associated with a crash. It was described to me by a New Mexico resident. He said he has talked to a ranch family in the plains of San Agustin who wanted to remain anonymous. Their story is that the former ranch owner, his teenage son, and a hired hand heard a loud explosion near their property on the evening of May 31st, 1947. The father was outside on a tractor and saw something crash on a mesa a few miles north of Elk Mountain at the southern end of the plains and southeast of Aragon, the map that I showed in the beginning. And now, here's that map again. In the next 2 days, the rancher asked a Magdalena doctor who had surveying equipment to help survey some property above his ranch. The rancher, his teenage son, hired hand, and doctor rode horseback up to about 4,000 feet toward Elk Mountain. There they saw an Army helicopter hovering over what they first assumed was a crashed airplane. Very thin silver material was torn and scattered on the ground, and military personnel were picking it up. While the ranch owner talked to a military man about who was going to clean up his land and pay for any damage, the doctor got off his horse and walked through some of the debris. Then a military policeman and an Army officer approached and told the rancher he could not go further because it was an off-limits military zone, so the four left. The son said later he heard the doctor tell his dad that before the Army kicked them out, he found a body, quote, that was not human. It had real big eyes and real strange-looking arms and hands, close quote. The rancher's son also remembered seeing a tent set up around tables covered with pieces of crash debris and one big piece that looked, quote, like a seat from a Ferris wheel with a curved top, close quote. A few days later, 2 Army officers and a civilian brought U.S. Army damage claim forms to the ranch. The son was asked to read and fill them out for his father, who did not read or write. When the father asked about the, quote, ship from Mars and the Martian lying on the ground, the civilian with the Army, probably CIA then, that was formed September 18, 1947 by Truman, said it was well, it would not have been the CIA if it's May 31st, because it did not exist. So, but everybody thinks that there was an intelligence agency here. The civilian intelligence agent said it was, quote, a chimpanzee inside an experimental plane, close quote. Swamp gas, weather balloons, on and on it goes. So chimpanzee inside an experimental plane crashed into Elk Mountain. When the father challenged that explanation, the civilian intelligence agent offered to bypass the paperwork and pay the father cash then and there if the rancher would sign a statement relinquishing any claims against the United States government and would promise to turn over to the Army anything else found at the crash site. The rancher and doctor, now deceased, were certain there was a cover-up about a crashed flying saucer, but the only thing they heard in public after that was a military plane had crashed near Reserve, New Mexico, a little southwest of Oregon, New Mexico. That's the story. That's why Reserve got inserted into all of this a long time ago, much to a lot of our confusions. So Reserve was counterintelligence. Elk Mountain in Oregon is probably where a crash occurred, but the one with the bismuth magnesium, I think, was Oscora Peak at White Sands Proving Ground. Longtime residents in the Horse Springs, Magdalena, Socorro, and Elk Mountain areas do remember airplane crashes through the years, but they don't remember specifically a flying saucer crash. But in research that I did for the UFO Report sighting special that I produced for the Fox network in 1991, I talked with Socorro resident Harold Baca. He had helped an elderly and sick man named Barney Barnett, who lived across the street until Barnett died in 1969. Barnett had been a field engineer for the U.S. Soil Conservation Service and worked throughout the plains of San Agustin. And Stanton Friedman, nuclear physicist and longtime researcher of crash disks and government cover-up, had reported in his 1992 book, Crash at Corona, that Barnett's close friend Vern Maltese and Barnett's niece Alice Knight remembered Barney saying he had come upon a silver disk and small dead non-humans wearing one-piece gray bodysuits somewhere in the plains of San Agustin. Baca and Barnett suspected his throat cancer was caused from bending down over the strange bodies, but no one remembered an exact date and specific location. Arizona researcher Victor Golubik thinks there is other evidence to support a crash location about 10 miles south of Horse Springs on May 31st, 1947, which again would be in this area. Unfortunately, the South Carolina writer never gave a definite date either, and the reference to between Sierra Blanca and the San Mateo Mountains is broad, but it is White Sands, and Oscora Peak comes up in too many other discussions that I think that's where this was. I continued to investigate the possibility that the aluminum pieces might be punch-outs from terrestrial machining operations, since they measured as common terrestrial quarter-inch and inch sizes. However, when I talked with people who were in the sci-tech area, the science and technology area of Alcoa aluminum, those engineers thought that the purity, they said it was above 99%, essentially pure, absolutely pure aluminum, that it was not typical of anything they used in industrial machining. So there was speculation that if the South Carolina writer's story were true, the military handlers might have had samples from the alleged extraterrestrial craft itself punched out like they would do punch-outs in a place like Alcoa Aluminum in squares to distribute to American scientists for study. On May 27, 1996, a third letter arrived containing a surprise. 6 more pieces of metal that were very different from the aluminum. The letter said, "Dear Mr. Bell, I have listened with interest to the ongoing reports on the samples I sent your way," which is me doing these reports in 1996. "I noted that the researcher, me, discussing the testing of the samples, noted that basically it is merely aluminum. Slight variations on the testing, but indistinguishable from normal aluminum." Well, not normal, according to Alcoa. Highly unusual to be so pure. Actually, this is precisely the same initial findings of Granddad's team. However, I neglected to include metallic samples of the exterior of the crashed Roswell disk. I now include the enclosed, and it can only say that these scrapings came from the exterior underside of the disk itself. It literally was a shell-like shielding of the disk, brittle and layered, almost with a prefabricated design and placing. Keep in mind, Mr. Bell, that these are the last of Granddad's samples. They have sat for years inside a closet with his personal effects. Because of certain concerns, I will not be contacting you on this matter. Perhaps I am a bit paranoid, but I do have a family and career to think about. I hope you understand. Hope these last samples are helpful. I will be listening, a friend. Art Bell called me and said there were 6 pieces, about 2 inches long, 1 inch wide, and about 1/4 of an inch thick. One side was dark and the other was a shiny silver. I contacted the university professor again, who had helped me with the aluminum, and he agreed to analyze the new material. So Bell shipped 2 fragments to him, keeping the other 4 in a safe deposit box. The professor's first step was to photograph the metal pieces as they arrived at his laboratory. He placed the dark side of one piece on the left and the silver side of the other on the right, both next to a quarter coin that is about 1 inch in diameter for size comparison. On June 8, 1996, the professor released his first report about the material. He had examined a cut and polished cross-section with a scanning electron microscope and energy dispersive spectroscopy, and this is what he stated. Each sample had a silvery, shiny side with a rough, granular appearance. The other side was blackish gray. Looking at the sample's edge on, numerous layers can be seen. They averaged 26 to 30 layers alternating. The samples were hard but brittle, and a few small pieces could be broken off using a small hand vise and manual pressure. Energy dispersive spectroscopy, EDS, revealed that the shiny side contained more than 95% magnesium and a small amount, 2 to 3% of zinc. The material appears to represent layers consisting mainly of magnesium, the small amount of zinc separated by thin layers containing what appears to be almost pure bismuth. In fact, in an ion microprobe, we could not even find any lead, and on the periodic elements chart, bismuth and lead are right next to each other. Bismuth is denser than lead, but usually you find lead with bismuth. At Carnegie Institute in Washington, we could not find any lead in the bismuth layers in these samples. The scanning electron microscope was set in a backscattering configuration so that heavier elements show up brighter. Therefore, the dark bismuth appears as thin white lines, and the much brighter, lighter magnesium-zinc shows as darker shades of gray. The professor measured the layers and found that the thin, wavy lines of bismuth varied from 1 to 4 microns, which is about half the diameter of a human blood cell, and the magnesium-zinc varied from 100 to 200 microns. One scientist thought the waviness might be a fractal wave pattern calculated in the layered materials construction, perhaps to better resonate with a specific frequency, or the waviness might be the result of heat absorbed in the metal's production or function. And today, several people think if there was a self-destruct mechanism that destroyed the propulsion system deliberately, and that the alien that was retrieved would not address anything about the propulsion system on that craft, that the wavy lines that run very consistently through all of these very well-shaped pieces of layered metal, it might be that we are seeing the artifacts of extreme heat from that event. This is not clear. It's confusing. Later, the professor did more refined analysis with wavelength dispersive spectroscopy. He said, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The material corresponds to layers of bismuth and magnesium-zinc, with the weight percent of the zinc varying slightly from about 2.4% to 2.9% between nearly pure bismuth layers. There's no zirconium that could be detected with the magnesium-zinc area, which is frequently found in magnesium-zinc alloys, close quote. In summary, the metal fragments allegedly from the central underside of a wedge-shaped spacecraft found in New Mexico have about 25 to 30 alternating layers. The bismuth layers average 1 to 4 microns, and the magnesium-zinc layers average 100 to 200 microns. One exotic metals manufacturer that I talked to in New Jersey, back in 1996, he was one of the first people I called. I just wanted to know, who makes it? How do you make it? Where is it on Earth? What can it do? I just wanted to know. And honestly, this is the first thing he said to me. Quote, no one laminates bismuth and magnesium. It cannot be done. 1996. Bismuth is a hard, brittle, metallic element that is grayish-white with a tinge of red, and that pink color in the stomach medicine Pepto-Bismol comes from a bismuth ingredient. Bismuth's atomic number on the periodic table of elements is 83. Lead is 82, so bismuth is heavier than lead. Bismuth is frequently found in ores of tin, lead, copper, and cobalt. Bismuth is not attacked by hydrochloric acid and only slightly by hot sulfuric acid, but the element is rapidly dissolved by either dilute or concentrated nitric acid. Further, the Guide to Uncommon Metals says, quote, bismuth is one of the few metals that expands when cooled, like water does when it turns to ice. And that makes bismuth valuable for detailed metal castings because it will expand into the cracks in the shape. Bismuth also has a low melting point, but its thermal conductivity is lower than that of perhaps every other metal with the exception of mercury, and its electrical resistance is high. A modern use is as a coolant for nuclear power reactors, close quote. Bismuth is the most diamagnetic of all the elements. It resists penetration by magnetic fields more strongly than any other element. Magnetic field lines tend to be displaced around bismuth rather than passing through it. Bismuth also has the greatest Hall effect. That means if a voltage is placed on bismuth while the metal is in a magnetic field, a current flow will be induced that is 90 degrees to the voltage. Bismuth is an efficient absorber of infrared energy, and researchers are experimenting with bismuth coatings that will convert heat to electricity. Bismuth is also added to metal mixtures in superconducting research. And just as a side note, beyond how put off, I sent this metal in '96 to a major superconductor researcher, how put off, talked with people at Los Alamos. I talked to a lot of people who are researching superconductivity. Every single one of them was interested in bismuth. Not anybody had ever heard of bismuth and magnesium, didn't even know how to do it. But it's interesting to me that that is the element that in 1996 to this day, that a lot of people in superconducting efforts, that there is something about bismuth that seems that research is trying to understand how that might be applied. On July 5th, 1996, a fourth and final letter to Art Bell from the South Carolina source added a few more comments. Quote, sample extraction, radiated light for a full 3 hours. This is from the center of the bottom of a wedge-shaped triangular craft. Originally located on central underside of wedge-shaped disc, speculate some type of shielding to enable craft and crew to survive accelerated entry into atmosphere when craft was experiencing uncontrolled descent. The pile of blackened ash was analyzed, and the ash was confirmed to be of the same elements of the layering. The ash consisted of fibrous dust and residue. Ash and all debris swept into bags placed in tag boxes, boxes placed into metal foot lockers. Initial examination off-site conducted at the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology. Secondary examinations at Los Alamos facility. Foot lockers subsequently airlifted by courier to Wright Field, Ohio, close quote. In addition to the unfamiliar combination of bismuth and magnesium-zinc, there were questions about the isotope ratios in the magnesium. Isotope refers to the number of protons and neutrons in the nucleus of each atom. For example, magnesium on Earth is made up of about 80% magnesium-24. That means there are 12 protons and 12 neutrons at the center of each magnesium-24 atom. The other 20% is equally divided between magnesium-25, which has one additional neutron compared to magnesium-24, and magnesium-26, which has 2 additional neutrons compared to magnesium-24. If the layered metal were truly extraterrestrial in origin, some wondered if anomalies might be detected in those ratios or percentages of isotopes. One such anomaly that some of you probably have heard about was reported in 1957 when a metal fragment, allegedly from a UFO in Ubatuba, Sao Paulo, Brazil, was analyzed by the Brazilian government in laboratory tests. The fragment was found and reported on September 14, 1957, after eyewitnesses saw a flying disc explode into thousands of fiery fragments which fell onto the beach and the sea. The metal tested to be nearly 100% pure magnesium and was 6.7% heavier than ordinary pure magnesium. Former NASA scientist Paul Hill, who is the author of the 1995 book Unconventional Flying Objects, A Scientific Analysis, it is considered required reading by anybody serious in this field. Paul Hill calculated that the density anomaly could be explained if the metal were the pure isotope magnesium-26, not found naturally on Earth. Supposedly, that's what he found. And then what happened? The report came out, and the metal disappears. No way for anybody to do a reality check. I learned that an ion microprobe, which could analyze magnesium, I don't know why these images look so silkscreeny here. I learned that there was an ion microprobe which could analyze magnesium isotopes and it had just been installed at the Carnegie Institution of Washington, D.C. back in '96. And after discussions with Dr. Eric Howery in the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism, he agreed to analyze the layered bismuth magnesium metal. I drove to Washington, D.C. from Philadelphia, where I lived at the time, on July 20th, 1996. He took the piece of cut and polished bismuth magnesium and put it in this cage to put it into the ion microprobe. Dr. Howery found about 11% more magnesium-26 in our mysterious sample, but still not outside terrestrial ranges for magnesium metal. One anomaly was that the bismuth magnesium layered material emitted more positive ions than the pure magnesium metal being used for standard comparison. I was there with him 8 hours. And the 8 hours, half of them were his own scientific curiosity. He had a control piece of magnesium, and he would put it in, and then he would put in the bismuth magnesium in the cage. He would go back and forth. And over 4 hours, he was frustrated because he couldn't understand why he was getting 60 times the emission of positive ions out of the sample. And he did it for 4 hours and other work because he said, I don't know if I'm dealing with a machine anomaly. I don't know what I'm dealing with here. But he said, this is definitely out of the normal. And he never did understand. He said, the bismuth magnesium sample gave count rates of positive magnesium ions, which were enhanced 60 times more than in the pure magnesium metal standard. He suggested 3 possible reasons for the difference. First, he explained that the zinc might act as a catalyst for magnesium ionization. Second, the catalytic process might be enhanced if there were a distinctive arrangement in the magnesium crystal structure which related to how the material was originally constructed. And I think every advanced scientist who has dealt with this thinks. In fact, the Cranford lab in London, they had it for a month in December of 1996. And my question to them, they weren't charging anything, they wanted to look at it. They said it was definitely the arrangements of the atoms in the bismuth and magnesium appeared to be calculated by intelligence, I believe is the way they put it. Third, if oxygen were somewhere in the sample, it could enhance magnesium ionization, but Howery said there was nothing in any of the ion microprobe spectra that showed any oxygen whatsoever. Another scientist tried to make it. This was a guy who was working in solar cell manufacturing. He took to vacuum vapor deposition. I was in his lab. I watched the beginning. He slowed down the vacuum process to building a layer, one layer of bismuth, and then one layer of magnesium-zinc, trying to match one layer every 7 days. And he made 4 layers in 28 days. And he sent me what he made with vacuum vapor deposition, using as close to the percentages of what we were dealing with in magnesium, zinc, and bismuth. And it was so funny to me because here is this beautiful, strange material that may have been altered in ways we have not a clue, in a deliberate shoot down or whatever it is, alien, and it was doing something on the bottom of a wedge-shaped vehicle, and the humans are trying to duplicate it, and he sends me these 4 layers that took 1 month to make. It was a square inch, like a postage stamp. And within 10 days of keeping it in a plastic bag on a shelf, never touching it, all of the bismuth delaminated. It looked like I had pepper. I had little white, they weren't silver. There was nothing about it that looked like this, but it was just so interesting that this guy and another person at Los Alamos said, well, we can do it if we apply money. And this guy said, well, I can do it. I can do it with vacuum vapor deposition. No, did not make it. Nobody has made it. I've talked about this with Hal Puthoff. I would welcome anybody here and beyond, if you can find anyone anywhere who can duplicate magnesium-zinc in the 96.4, 2.6 alloy. And it is essentially pure bismuth, 1 to 4 microns, sandwiched with 100 to 200 microns. Nobody knows why it was made, what it did, and nobody seems to be able, even in 2016, to accept the challenge. It keeps being repeated out there. Somebody make this. Well, I kept reporting all of this work on Dreamland and asked if anyone listening had any information about the construction or function of this. And I contacted the director of material sciences at MIT in Cambridge. I contacted the National Science Foundation. I talked with metallurgists at Sandia National Laboratory in Albuquerque. I talked with aerospace and exotic metals manufacturers. I had a notebook of all the people and addresses and phone numbers, a whole spiral notebook of all these people trying to find something about this, and no one had any knowledge of such a layered material. Metals' possible function included resisting or detecting magnetic fields, and this led to research with Travis Taylor down at Redstone Army Arsenal. I went down there. He took a piece of the bismuth magnesium and put it on a plastic insulator, and it was a Van de Graaff, and we had gotten information from a whistleblower. Try it with a very specific amount of energy, and then also, which was about 500,000 volts. And then add a 7 megahertz radio signal. Do it 2 ways. And we did. And he thought he had controlled, this is what he did for a living for the Department of Defense and the Defense Intelligence Agency. He's a first-class physicist. And he even asked the DIA, can I work with Linda Moulton Howe on this bismuth magnesium material? He called me up and he said, they know all about you. They seem to listen to you on the radio. They're very interested in this bismuth magnesium layered material you're reporting about with Art Bell. And they said, yeah, you can work with her as long as every single thing that you do and find, you report back to the Defense Intelligence Agency. And we laughed because it said to us, they didn't know what it was either. Travis was puzzled, said maybe that waviness relates to if you have a kind of propulsion system that is dealing with manipulating magnetic field lines, maybe there is something that if you can layer with bismuth that is so diamagnetic that you can control in either dynamic magnetic fields or static magnetic fields, neutralizing gravity and turn something into a lifting body. So he said, I know somebody who is working for the DoD on anti-gravity right now in California. They're very interested in getting a piece of this. He said, I will give you my personal promise if you'll send a piece, but you can't interview anybody, you can't say the name of the company, but for sheer, let's see if this will react. Will it turn into a lifting body in dynamic or static magnetic fields ranging through a whole series of frequencies? So a guy in California had a piece for 2 months, many interesting phone calls. But Travis, I was there, and here we had the piece. It's actually on a video, and I just don't have it converted to DVD. I should do that. When the 7 megahertz signal was turned on in addition to the 500,000 volt field, and only then, when we did it off, on, with that 7 megahertz radio frequency signal, the bismuth magnesium that was sitting on plastic started doing this. And at one point, it moved this way. And all of a sudden, and Eric was not sure what he did, he went to adjust the radio frequency, and the magnesium literally leaped out into the air and onto the floor. That was a lifting body, but not exactly the way we thought. Whatever the layered bismuth and magnesium-zinc's function might be, it does remain a mystery to this day. The information from the South Carolina source could be a controlled government release into public consciousness without the political commitment of official sanction. There's lots of that being done through reporters, Hollywood. It's happening everywhere. In this case, I think this was a real Army guy with a real grandfather who really did serve security. If government insiders do know about layered bismuth magnesium and the extraterrestrial wedge-shaped craft, their silence is consistent with a policy of cover-up since at least the early 1940s. At least one political representative that I know knows a lot about New Mexico UFOs and our government's strict policy of lies and silence about the alien presence on Earth. He is former New Mexico State Representative Andrew Kistner, who told me about his official research into the 1947 V-2 rocket program, UFO crashes and retrievals in New Mexico. He had off-the-record conversations with military and intelligence operatives from White Sands Missile Range and the Naval Research Lab that is housed at White Sands and has been housed there since after the war. When we were setting rockets, the Navy has always been intimately involved with UFOs. Representative Kistner had assembled many old newspaper articles and some leaked documents that he shared with me, and he said that he learned from a Naval Research Lab contact at White Sands that in the 1940s to early 1950s there was an American government policy to shoot down unidentified aerial discs, and Leonard Stringfield told me the same thing at his house, eye to eye, that when he was in the Air Force, the reason he became so interested in UFOs is that he knew that there was a secret policy that the United States was deliberately trying to use microwaves and anything it could to shoot down extraterrestrial, I'll use the word, or alien presence, technology in the skies. But the truth is, to Kistner, Stringfield, and a whole long list, the craft always retaliated. The craft always retaliated. It is one of the biggest, best kept secrets. That sentence alone, I could do another 2 hours. Many of our pilots died, which forced an end. That's what Len Stringfield told me all the way back in the 80s, to our shoot-down policy. Andy Kistner said he learned that President Harry S. Truman ordered a policy of denial in the interest of national security about all UFO crash retrievals. He was scared. They had planes, civilian planes, that were being taken out of the skies in crashes by UFOs. They knew it. His classified order that set all of this secrecy and lies and black programs, and I think a black underbelly of the United States of America that is part of the reason why we are in such a mess today. So corrupt and unethical, because when you have trillions of dollars that are going to programs that are not ever to be made public to the surface life of Earth, it means that everything that's happening on the surface of the Earth is concocted. And if you concoct a surface layer to hide and camouflage the underground layer, the insidious corruption that that automatically brings explains a lot about 2016. To underscore the reality of the extraterrestrial presence and government knowledge about it, I would like to share excerpts from a videotaped interview that I did on April 24th, 2006, with one of the few military sources in my career who has been willing to talk on the record, on camera, with their face about extraterrestrial biological entities. His name is Thomas Coleman Shepard. He served in the United States Navy from September 1975 until his retirement 20 years later in 1995 as an E-7 Chief Petty Officer, Chief Yeoman. Tom is now 62 years old and wants to be on the record about his extraterrestrial knowledge because he told me, quote, "I can't believe our government is still keeping it a secret," close quote. Tom strongly feels that the public should be told the truth. Here is Thomas Coleman Shepard's naval history of assignments from March 26, 1976 to 1978 with the amphibious Group 1 pack at White Beach in Okinawa, Japan. Now we're going back 40 years to Thanksgiving night in 1976. Tom was stationed at White Beach Naval Base in Okinawa. At the time, he was a seaman apprentice to the staff of the commander of the amphibious Group 1. Most of his work was clerical. That Thanksgiving night, he was in the administration building with two other men, Robert Turman and Craig Howard. Howard was mechanically gifted and liked to prove he could get into sensitive areas that were off limits. That Thanksgiving night, 40 years ago, Craig Howard had gotten into a vault that contained classified material and was yelling for Turman to join him. Tom Shepard watched as Turman ran by into the administration office that contained the vault. Shepard wondered what Howard had found that was so urgent. Listen now as retired Navy Chief Yeoman Tom Shepard tells what happened.
And I saw Howard and Topin go into the vault. And they were in there for about 5 minutes. And Howard comes out first, and Topin follows. And Topin's kind of got tears in his eyes, and he said that it's true. Well, this really caught my attention, so I was really astounded to hear, this kind of reaction from him. So then Howard, he calls me over and he says, "Come on in." So I go in there, right, and it's a vault, and it's a small room. It's got the filing cabinets and the safes. And it's got a table right there in the middle of the vault. The table's about the size of this, but square and taller. And on that table, he had this file laid out. And this file was, it was like all spread out on the table here, okay? And it had photographs and documents and the covers and everything. And he said, "This is what it's all about," and he handed me one of the photographs. And I looked at it, and I had no idea what I was looking at. It was an old black and white photograph It had a old truck in it, and down on the ground, and you could tell they were out in the desert, was some sort of a creature that looked like, well, what I would call now an alien creature. I had no idea what I was looking at back then, so I said to Howard, well, what am I looking at here? He goes, well, what do you think? I said, I don't know. He says, it's an alien creature from outer space, you big dummy. I'm like, oh, no, it is not. And he goes, oh, you're looking right at one of these, and you still can't believe it, won't believe it? That's incredible. So I looked at that photograph, and I looked at another photograph that had him laid out on a skid, and looked at two other photographs, and they had a very dark black background, and one of them was a headshot, and the other photograph was of an elongated shot on a type of gurney. And I looked at the documents, and there was a lot of red ink, top secret. One of the words was magic, and magic was spelled with a J. And I even made a comment to Howard. I says, look at here, they can't even spell magic right. They spelled it with a J. It just looked like an old file, but the gauge of the year would have to be from the 30s or the 40s, just based on the truck. The aliens sort of looked like that one down in the Roswell Museum, but different too. Because it's black and white, you couldn't really get a lot of tone with the kind of skin it had. But if I had to describe it at all, it would have been like snake skin in sort of way.
Can you explain that further?
They had a whitish kind of appearance, but you could tell it had some color to it. And if I had to describe it as matches any other type of animal that I know of, it would have been like that of a white snake, say.
And could you discern scales?
Not really, no. No, but you could tell that they just looked like bumps, and who knows what they were. And it was throughout. But mostly like on the arm area and on the head area.
And was this being wearing any clothes?
No, you could tell it. And here are some renditions of drawings that I made of the photographs that I saw in Okinawa. And what you have here is a desert and the alien entity. Here's the guy in the jeans and the cowboy boots. Here's the truck, and here's the entity in the truck looking out. And in the actual photograph, though, you could barely make him out because of the angle of the sun and what it was doing from the slats to him. So I had to actually have this pointed out to me. This is what we call photograph number 1. This is another rendition. This is at the aircraft hangar. Okay. Pretty much, this is really a rendition because of the angle. I really am not an artist, okay, so I couldn't really draw it to the right angle. But over here is the military man in his khaki pants, his brown shoes, and this is the front of the aircraft hangar. This is the opening here. And I tried to, what really stood out for me in this photograph was the angle of the slants from the panes of the windows from the hangar, of the style of hangar that it was. Mm-hmm. And here's the alien that's mostly intact, and next to him, or it, is the other alien that was crumpling in a fetal position, and most of its side had been badly damaged. And here's the alien that's next to it, and I tried to make a rendition here of the crumpling and everything, but I didn't do a good job really. But most of its head, as I recall, was badly damaged either through charring of some sort or other damage.
And burned.
Or burned, yeah. Okay. And here's another rendition. Now in the photograph, this is of course all black, okay? But what you're seeing is where the flash took the photograph of what you can see here, and it's a gurney in an elongated fashion, okay? and the alien entity laying on top of the gurney. And there you have it. And evidently in the same space, they took a close-up of the alien's head from the neck on up with the same black background, and here it is, as I best recall. I tried to get as best to make it look as real as I could by not giving too much detail with the eyes, but the eyes, the sockets are very almond-shaped, and they're fatter up here, and they skinny down, okay? They're fatter here, and they skinny down. And the blotting I'm trying to describe here, okay, looks sort of, well, veiny, I guess you could say, or just bumps. And that was the best I could describe it here.
And this reminded you of reptilian?
Yeah, you could tell that it was sort of reptilian-ish, but at the same time, no, you really couldn't because of the black and white photo, okay? I do recall that its neck was, in comparison to its head, really this skinny, and it had a lot of wrinkles.
As if it were old?
No, as if it was just the way it was. The way it was.
But did that remind you also of a reptile?
Mm-hmm, yeah. I tried to make a description of how long its fingers are and in comparison to its wrist. Mm-hmm. This is a better drawing, okay, of its hand, palm in this fashion, all right, without a thumb. If I had a thumb, it was this sort of a nib-looking thing here. And it did have these slanted tip fingertips, and on the tips, you could tell it was sort of a roundness, or what I call a suction cup. Linda, there is nothing on this earth that we know of that looks anything like this. It's not a human being. I'm telling you straight up. It wasn't a monkey. It wasn't an animal of any kind. It was like nothing that I had ever seen, and that's all I could say. It was definitely not a human. It was definitely not an animal that we know of.
What emotion did you feel?
I was in shock. I mean, what can I say? I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't even accept it at the time. It took hours for me to even accept what I had saw. Even with a guy that was older than me that was telling me, look at what you're looking at here, okay? These were not fakes. This was real stuff. I was overwhelmed.
Tom Shepard and his two Navy colleagues, Craig Howard and Robert Terman, thought that they had been able to enter the classified vault without anyone finding out. But on the Monday after that 1976 Thanksgiving weekend, the three men were summoned by a very angry Chief James Seeley. Tom saw the other two men had to put on their dress uniforms for some kind of punishment, and he was kept in office detention for several hours. But Thomas Shepard was never asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement swearing him to secrecy for the rest of his life. 2 weeks after their vault adventure, Captain Seeley ordered Tom Shepard, Robert Terman, and Craig Howard to drive with him to a dentist at Kadena Air Force Base, about an hour from White Beach. Tom was put to sleep and was never told what the dentist did. He thinks that the other two men were treated the same way, but his Navy records mysteriously never included one word about the Kadena Air Force Base dentist visit. I asked Tom if the dentist might have implanted monitoring devices in the men's teeth. Tom said that a few years later he learned that was possible to do and figured that is what had been done. The tooth had bothered him after the Okinawa dentist visit, and he finally had it pulled out in the 1990s by a civilian dentist in the United States, and the dentist asked him, quote, "When did you do intelligence work?" Close quote. Tom told the dentist that he had never done intelligence work, but he did not tell the dentist about what had happened in Okinawa. Several months after the three men were taken to the Kadena Air Force Base dentist, Tom finally learned more from Craig Howard that the vault photos and files were from a UFO crash near Roswell, New Mexico in the late 1940s.
It was probably a couple of months after the incident that I finally came up to Howard and I said, okay, what was all that? And tell me what you know about what we saw. And he told me about Roswell. And he said that, he said two things really. He said that he had heard of Roswell before, and that he did see Roswell in those documents. And that the flying saucers, or whatever you wanted to call them at the time, did crash in New Mexico in the 40s, and that the government, or the military, whatever you want to call it, okay, recovered the bodies, and we've been hiding them ever since. I eventually transferred in March of '78. Topin got accepted for a naval officer candidate school program, and Howard transferred sometime in '77. And I'll never forget that day either.
What happened?
Well, he had made second class, which was E5, okay? And I thought he was doing really good. And there at the last minute, or within weeks of having to have gotten to re-enlist, he backed out. So I came up to him on the day he was leaving. He was in his uniform. And I said, Howard, you know, what gives, man? You know, life is good. You made second class. Why are you getting out? And he said, Tom, I just can't do it no more. And I said, does it have anything to do with, and he said, the vault, you know, what we saw in that. And he looked at me, and he got beet red. And he was shaking his finger at me, and he said, don't you ever bring that up to me again. And that was the last thing I ever heard from him. And I haven't seen him in over 30 years now.
Did you take it from that comment that he had been punished because of the vault incident?
I believe that, well, it's either one of two things. I think they jacked with him myself. I think they gave him threats. But it could have been just that he knew a truth, and it wasn't going to go anywhere. And he didn't like that.
Were you asked to sign any kind of a non-disclosure agreement?
No, never. Let's jump ahead to 1989. Unsolved Mysteries comes on TV, and it was a popular show then. And one night, they played, Robert Stack hosting, the Roswell incident. And I had no idea at the time that this was in books or had already been talked about. I was literally blown away. And I thought to myself, well, you know, national TV is going to come out and blast it all over the place. What's to stop me? So at the time, I worked at a 3-star command there in Norfolk. It was ComNav Airland. And I worked for the operations department. It's Code 30, and one of the people in Code 30 was a man named Captain Wood. And he had a person that worked for him who was a lieutenant commander, and I don't remember his last name. But one day, it was shortly after this was played on TV, the Roswell incident on Unsolved Mysteries, the subject of ETs came up, and we were just talking, and even though I had been, well, I'd run into a lot of trouble in other commands, not a lot of trouble, but, well, somewhat anyway, okay? We could get into that. But I had opened my mouth before, okay? And I was tired of keeping it closed. So I told this lieutenant commander who worked for Captain Wood what I knew, and I told him the whole Okinawa story, and the file, and the photos, and the whole thing. And I thought the guy was going to have a heart attack. He went into shock. He got really angry. He wanted to tape record me. He started making threats on me. We got to sort of a heated argument. And he said that he was going to have to tell Captain Wood about this. So I said, fine, tell him. So a couple hours later, Captain Wood calls me in his office. He says, sit down. Heard you did some talking today. And I said, yes, sir, I sure did. You want to tell me what you told Lieutenant Commander down there? All right. So I told him the whole Okinawa story. And I said, all right, I'm pretty convinced that you saw what you saw. But just so you know, we don't call them aliens. I said, we don't? No, we call them EBEs, for extraterrestrial biological entities. I said, all right, well, that makes sense. Then we had a conversation, and it was basically like this. I asked him why we had kept this under wraps for all these years, and what did it have to do with the military and the whole thing. And he gave me some descriptions about it. He said that since that period of time, and on up till present day, that
You're talking about the 40s to 1990?
yeah, the 40s to 1990.
Right.
Okay, that they had been using this, and it was all for good reasons.
They had been using what?
Well, I've never really understood that either. They've been using the technology that the aliens gave them, or they've been using the crashed vehicles. Even though he said that, okay, it was just sort of inference that, yeah, the whole thing that we recovered, okay? So that's how I took it.
That our government was using?
Yes,
For?
what we had recovered.
For?
For purposes of military advantage. I asked him if the president knew, and he said, can't go there. I asked him how this might have an effect on the society and religion, and basically the whole thing was people couldn't handle it. There'd be too much shock, and we've got to maintain this under wraps. It could be disruptive to society. It could be disruptive to the Bible. And so, I asked him, I said, well, look, yeah, you have the Bible, okay, but it's not like as if people aren't going to, people are going to just quit believing in Jesus or anything, okay? Come on. I said, no, but, this could open the door to several other things in the Bible that, we wouldn't want, and religions to have to deal with, okay? It could just open a door to many things that would be so disruptive, we can't go there. So you just need to keep this under wraps. You're not in trouble or anything, okay? And that's it. And if you say that we had this conversation, you can, it didn't happen. So if you know what's good for you, you're going to keep this under wraps. You want to make truth, don't you? I said, yeah. All right, well, let's play ball by the rules then.
Did you ask him when the public and the media would be allowed to know?
No, probably never.
Is that what he said?
That's what he said. Probably never.
But that means the planet is living in a huge lie.
Yes, of course it does. Especially when you accept that when you're in the military. You accept that because you're working with secret material all the time. And you understand that the United States maintains military advantage over our enemies, and you accept that. That's an okay answer for a military guy.
But isn't that an incredible answer? Probably never, that the world would be kept in the dark forever?
We went there, and I respectfully tried to argue with him. I said, yes, when we recovered the aliens, okay, that was the 1940s. That's completely different from today. This is the 90s, okay? People would be able to handle it. And he said, oh, yeah, you think so? I said, well, could you handle it? No. Did it scare you? Yeah. Would it be old news in 2 weeks? I don't know.
How does that make you feel as an American?
Oh, that's a big question. How does that make me feel as an American? I think the public should be given the truth. And that's all there is to it. Enough is enough. For years, I've understood the need for secrecy, but I can't accept it no more. Not for this. Not to arrogantly and outlandishly just come right out with books and in media to say Roswell didn't happen. It hurts.
Thomas Coleman Shepard was honorably discharged from active duty as E7 Chief Petty Officer, Chief Yeoman, United States Navy, November 30th, 1995, after 20 years of service. I look back for 37 years having no idea about any of this, living a life of grace like most Americans who haven't a clue, until animal mutilations crossed my path as Director of Special Projects at the CBS station in Denver in September of '79. And from '79 to now, in July of 2016, I know personally of dozens. I don't know any women who have served in capacities that have been dealing with extraterrestrials. The men that I have been able to look at eye to eye, I remember one specifically that sums up all the others. Not everybody has been able to survive the pressures and the punishments that they have had in their work, having to do with keeping the surface life of Earth ignorant about an alien presence that's been here for at least 270 million years, according to the Defense Intelligence Agency. Whose planet is this? What are we really? If they have been making and cloning pilots that have been flying in a variety of craft, and many, many craft don't need any kind of biological system. They're self-activating software. They travel galaxies. They don't need anybody in them. But if cloning and hybridization has been one of the big services of planet Earth to at least 3 competing geopolitical, territorial, conflicting non-humans for 270 million years, and we are on a planet in which 1% for at least 5,000 years has wanted to keep, on purpose, Homo sapiens sapien dumb and blind, because when we're dumb and blind, we're more easily manipulated. And there is something so strange about 2016. It is as if, as at a lot of levels, not just human politics, but something else going on perhaps in the cosmos. Almost like a political argument between Democrats and Republicans. What is allowable to do with life? And there appears to be something out there, the remote viewers talk about this, that there really is some kind of, not just Milky Way galaxy, but other galaxies, that the size of what we are in is huge, vast cycles of time. And if there is fairness in the big machinery of the cosmos, if at the moment of death, reincarnation is, as the Eben told one of the captains that stayed with it at Los Alamos for 3 years until it died of natural causes, June 18th, 1952. If the soul and the recycling of the soul in and out of containers is something that the non-humans are interested in, and humanity is even kept in a mythological relationship with that, and that we have wars raging on this planet that are abusive and bullying and horrible. Is it all related to this geopolitical territorial conflict of something that is not human and has been here for so long? In my own mind and in my own soul, as I stand here today on July 29, 2016, I have been exposed to a great deal just in the last 5 years about the manipulation of Earth by these other intelligences that has been building inside of me a kind of, I guess, quiet rage for every true Homo sapien sapien. And we don't even know who is Homo sapien anymore, because apparently everything can hide in camouflage bodies just like they make the craft invisible. But for the Homo sapien sapien, I don't care if you're an American, a Russian, Iraqi. It seems to me that the right of Homo sapien sapiens to know the truth about what made them, why they are here, what continues to manipulate, what continues to harvest genetic material, what is doing trade routes with Earth while Homo sapiens sapiens are completely ignorant. That our right as Homo sapiens sapien trumps, absolutely trumps, government positions that denial, lies, and silence are the only answer from here to the end of eternity. I can't imagine that the divine field of this universe or this cosmos would allow an entire planet or other planetary systems to be so blinded and deafened by the truth of what they are, that we were made by something out there that continues to interact with Earth and is an alien presence. It's part of what has kept me going against tremendous pressures against me and others. And I guess I'm saying these words to you because there is something that does feel so critical about this moment in time when the United States itself feels like it is cracking apart because the underbelly of so many things are so false and so phony. And they are kept in place because they're all, those in power, are trying to hide what I've shared with you today and millions of other pieces. And I guess I just want to end by asking you for a show of hands. How many of you feel that truth should trump for Homo sapien now? Thank you, and I really do feel that is the position of the world. Out of rooms like this, conferences, books, radio, television, can the energy keep going forward that will crack this open for real? Can you believe, sitting here, whether you're engineers, that in 2016, with what appears now, I'm getting, I'm going to say, some hard, solid data that I can't report yet because I can't get the scientists. Scientists are terrified of losing laboratory funding today if they tread anywhere around this field. And one thing for you to think about as you leave, this information that I have, that I would like to put meat on the bones of it, but I'm just going to leave you to think about this. How many are aware of Ceres, the dwarf planet out between the asteroid belt and Mars? And if you're not aware, we have a spacecraft that has been going around and is about to end its mission, but it has taken extraordinary photographs of the white glowing patches, but more interestingly is the 2 or 4 mile, there's now argument about that, but a hugely tall mountain. And the mountain has grooves that come down all the way around it. And right next to it is a crater that if you took the mountain with the grooves and you turned it upside down, it looks like they would fit. And that comes from the director at that JPL that I've interviewed 3 times, who himself in the first interview said, yeah, it looks like this mountain could fit into that crater. We're very puzzled. And most recently, I have been told off the record, it is a mining operation. And that one of the reasons why you have not heard or seen more about Ceres since the first big plunge of all the news and all of the video is apparently this is now the policy of denial is now going to extend to our solar system and Mars and Ceres. We can't. How can we possibly continue to live on planet Earth with this schizophrenic disconnect between what the reality is in our solar system, the Earth and the Milky Way galaxy, and beyond, and this false, phony, concocted planet in which 1% for at least 5,000 years of current modern human history, the 1% that controls it today, controlled it 5,000 years ago, that 1% has to have a hidden agenda. We've got to wake up to a whole planet. And I thank you for the time and for listening and for you allowing me to be a bit expressive. I feel that something is urgent in time, that humans have to demand the truth or they're never going to be given it. And then I think Earth becomes a prison planet, and I don't want that. I want the truth, no matter what it is, with light going forward. And that seems to me, that's the crossroads right now in 2016. Thank you.